This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of When Science Speaks. Today's episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which works with scientists and engineers to help them get funding, gain influence, and build strategic relationships. I am so happy that we have Mike Grandinetti and Ikhlaq Sidhu with us today to give us an update on a really innovative, I know that word is thrown around a lot, but I have to say this is absolutely in that white space of newness that is usually an indicator of innovation. An update on the work that they've been doing regarding their university enterprise, virtual university, their GVC. They're going to talk about that in a moment, which I think you're going to find fascinating. It's going to contain a lot of learnings also for the future. So with that, I'd just like to have Mike kick it off a little bit to kind of bring us up to speed, Mike, if you would. Give listeners some context, and then we'll go deeper, and Ikhlaq obviously chime in.
That sounds great. Mark, listen, thanks for having us back. And it's always great to reconnect. And for some of the listeners who have heard us before together, Mark and I first came together sometime last March during the first real significant peak in the pandemic, when we were hearing a lot of negative news and said, there's so many innovative things happening in the world, let's start recording some podcasts collaboratively. Mm-hmm. And as Mark and I went out and did that, we interviewed innovators from Georgia Tech, from Rutgers, from the University of Delaware, from a number of other universities, Smith College, and then doctors at Mass General Hospital. And one of the things that kept coming up during the podcast that Mark and I did together was the criticality of allowing undergrad engineering students to learn how to go beyond, book knowledge. And a lot of them, because school had been put on hiatus, were working in labs and working on a lot of critical, personal protective equipment and ventilators. And the second thing that we learned was how critical it was to knock down silos, especially in universities where there can be a tremendous resistance to working across colleges or working across institutes. So, that had a profound impact on Mark. I know you and I have had a number of discussions about that. So, as we fast forward, Professor Ikhlaq Sidhu, who is going to join us, who is the founder and faculty director and chief scientist of the Sutarja Center of Entrepreneurship and Technology at University of California, Berkeley, is just celebrating his 15th anniversary running the Institute. And so he and I have been living somewhat parallel lives on both coasts, right? He's been doing it as the director of a center at a prestigious public university and has won an award from the IEEE for innovative practices in teaching. And I've been doing it as a faculty member at a number of different institutions. But the commonality is this incredible commitment to experiential education, right? And doing something that is connecting minds and hands, and how much more effective that is. So as the pandemic continued to rage on, we were both hearing from our respective students how hard it was for technical students to find jobs. And it was an incredible example of an inefficient market. You had all of these companies that had innovation mandates, but didn't have the skill sets to execute. And you had all of these very dedicated, hyper-current students that had the skills that companies wanted, but they had no access. So we thought that given our collective networks, we might be able to bring these two communities together. And, and Ikhlaq will talk a lot more about, creating the university of the future. But the Global Venture Catalyst, we kicked it off. In fact, you were one of the very first people we talked to when we introduced it to the world in November. And within just a couple of months, we ran the program, and extremely pleased with how it went. So what I'd love to do is talk a little bit about, what our goals were, and more importantly, what the outcomes were, and then hand it off to Ikhlaq to kind of talk about where we go from here, because we're very excited and we've got some very ambitious plans.
Great. No, that sounds wonderful. Yeah, that's a great scene setter. So yeah, please, let's hear where sort of, what outcomes, what results, and what you see in the future.
Yeah. So, we set this up as a global design sprint. Now, some of your listeners may not know what a design sprint is. And the word design is not just industrial design or human-centric design. A sprint is typically laid out over a 4-day period. And it's all about a bias toward action, about, coming in with a fairly clear idea of a problem that you need to solve. And then with a very specific methodology, with an intense bias toward action, moving towards some tangible, demonstrable outcome in just 4 days. So it's about as far from the ivory tower as one can be. And so we were looking at a variety of different sprints, including, AI data science oriented sprints, creating a minimum viable product, doing a technology assessment, doing a design update, right, around user interface or user experience. So all of those are within the realm of sprints. And so what we did is we reached out to our collective global networks, and we truly were working with top research universities on 5 continents. And at the same time, we brought in about 40 corporate collaborators, very large companies like Dassault and Medtronic and Applied Materials, but also venture capital firms and edtech accelerators, and using a methodology of, allowing students to kind of state what their choices were, their career choices and their skill choices, and then using an AI algorithm that was designed by Ikhlaq, we were able to match and create what we thought were optimally formulated teams. And Mark, here's where it gets really interesting, right? So we talk about breaking down silos, right? So students came together across time zones, across cultural and ethnic, boundaries, and a lot of different complementary skills. So we really did everything we could to build the most effective teams possible with the assistance of AI. And each company's leader, whoever brought us the project, served as the primary mentor for that project. And what we saw in just 4 full days, in many cases, was just remarkable, right? And you get to see students that are willing to bring their A game and do whatever it takes. And what we really recognized, I think, was so many of these students, who especially outside of the United States, where engineering education, scientific education is so theoretical, that their opportunity to put their skills in, apply their skills and put them into practice, and do it on real world innovation projects around, use cases and industries that they want to work in when they graduate. And to meet students from other parts of the world was it was an exhilarating experience for them, to say the least. So, the energy that came out of this event was just absolutely palpable. And, a couple of the key outcomes, right? One key outcome is, we're seeing some of our students getting hired as interns, and I'll give you just a couple of examples, right? One example is where a student from the Czech Republic, a very quiet, low-key student, but incredibly technically competent as a data scientist, is about to get hired as an intern with a Boston-based edtech company that has, the founder is an MIT graduate. The edtech company is, already solving problems at a lot of prestigious universities. They've got an investment in them from LearnLaunch, which is the leading edtech accelerator in the country. And Dominic would never have thought about moving outside of the Czech Republic, and so therefore would have had very limited choices in which to apply his skills. But now he's about to join a fascinating company in a space that he's really excited about.
Right, right. Mike, I want to ask, that is such a great story. And I want to ask you if there are other, not sort of stories about where people are going, but the types of projects that people were working on during the sprint.
Absolutely. So in this instance, we'll talk about Beagle Learning, the company I was referring to. Mm-hmm. And this is a company that, there's a wonderful book called The Perfect Question, right? And the pedagogy embedded in the Beagle Learning EdTech platform is about helping students use, the right questions for inquiry. And sometimes questions can be asked out of order. And so there was an artificial intelligence, data science approach to making sure that the questions were being asked sort of in an appropriate flow around appropriate clusters, so that the questions didn't appear to be random or chaotic. Mm-hmm. So that was one. We had another company that was all about making consumers far more aware about how their choices impacted greenhouse gas emissions. We had another project out of Norway, and this is where another wonderful story. The company known as Elkem is about to ramp up a massive electric vehicle battery capability, but a very clean battery, a revolutionary new battery. And a young woman, Celonis from the University of Delaware, was on that project. Mm-hmm. She wants to work on the auto industry, and she's going to likely be working with them now as an intern. Another company wound up working on what we'll call Uber for personal security. So it's a big idea, right? But just imagine that, as a supplement to police forces, you can have a subscription and you have security guards driving around and covering some kind of geographical perimeter. And if you need help with something, to be able to just literally click on your app and have someone come in and do an intervention. Ikhlaq, you probably want to share a few. I know that there were so many, right? One was around with Medtronic. They were looking at sickle cell anemia, specifically in Africa. Mm-hmm. So the variety of projects was just staggering, quite frankly. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I love it. And the example of the choices, how your own specific choices can impact greenhouse gas emissions is so important from a policy perspective, because people throw up their hands and don't, they may have this sort of high level, more abstract, concerns, say, about how do we attack climate change, but they feel powerless to do anything about it. And giving them these specifics on how they could do that and multiplying that over a large scale could make a really big impact. But really exciting. Ikhlaq, I'm interested in hearing more, and know that our listeners are too.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. So as Mike said, also thanks for having us back, and just really pleasure to, this is my first 10 words. So thanks for, hosting, and it is really nice to get a chance to continue this conversation. I guess to pick up from where we left off in this last segment here, there's definitely lots of examples of things that happened there. One that comes to mind is actually Unbiased, which is another startup being developed, which is basically finding ways to take the bias out of the hiring process. And in this case, what happened is that the students actually ended up being able to develop an MVP, or a minimum viable product. Not a full product, but like basically kind of a super simple version of the product that would then be built upon later to develop this company. And I mean, like, I could speak to just the need for Unbiased and how important it is and how great all the people are. But I think more broadly, I think the message that I would have is that there's just so many kinds of projects and capabilities and skills, and they all came together. And there were, to me, there were a few questions coming into it which kind of got answered as we did it. One was, would students want to come to a program where they're not getting university credit and they're not being paid anything, and they're going to be doing some project work, and how many are going to sign up, and what kind of students are you actually going to get? And in this case, the answer was an incredible number of students expressed interest. A lot of them were very proactive. They put a lot of effort into it. They were from all places around the world. They were from top schools around the world. So that question got answered for us in this last one, which is students do have interest to connect into real projects, into connect into these industries, to get to know those domains, the industry domains. So that was real. And then the other question that I had was, would people from the companies find this helpful or useful? And it's kind of funny, because on one hand, we've got this set of students who are wondering how to connect into the companies. Coincidentally, when we talk to the people who are from all these different organizations, those top technical students are like gold. They are like incredibly rare commodities, or rare things that that they can't come across so easily. And so while the students have great interest, it turns out that the industries and the people in these industries have great interest in finding them. And they have interest in finding them, I'm going to say, first from a talent point of view, because literally every organization depends on the quality of people that you can bring in or can be part of the teams that you have. And then I'm going to say secondarily, lots of these problems are complicated and to solve, and they're hard, and sometimes in a short amount of time you can actually solve problems that have been sitting around for a while. But I'd say talent first, and then the actual problems next. But for those two reasons, the companies were really engaged. And out of this, what I would say, we also validated is that the project, quote, the project, the experience of the project really is the interview. That's the model that the world has come to, is when you hire people, particularly newer people out of college, but I think this is broad, to some degree. Can you hire them really only by grades? If you did well in your classes, or one person did better in a class than another person, is that person a better fit for the project? Are they a better fit for the company? Do they have both the technical skills and the behaviors, the team behaviors that you need? It's one thing that you solve the problem. It's another thing that you solve the problem, but everyone's unhappy with each other by the end of solving that problem. Right. And so, all those entrepreneurial, innovative behaviors, the ones that make you proactive, the ones that, like get stuff done when nobody else wants to do it, and somebody actually will do it. Those different kinds of behaviors, or the one who's willing to say, this is not going to work, when everybody is, too afraid to tell everyone that this is not going to work. Those are all important. Sorry, I know you're I'll just finish my sentence.
That's okay.
All that combination of behavior plus skill, those are things that we're able to get out, profile. So from a student point of view, we can develop them, we can introduce them to things that are really valuable, but at the same time, we can filter or profile or grade them in a way, and I don't know what's the right word, because in this category, but we can figure out who are the best people for any given opportunity. I don't think companies really have any good way to do that today. So I think a lot of things became clear to us in running this last version.
Yeah, I just love this. And I have a few follow-up questions that I'd like you and Mike to address. And one is the incredible diversity of the teams.
Yeah.
And as well as the lack of really a pre-existing relationship among team members.
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you to talk about that. And of course, people think traditionally when you're thinking about teams, the forming, norming, and performing kind of thing. But when you're talking about a sprint like the one that you conducted, these timeframes get compressed. So how did that diversity play out? And then the other, which is skill, which is country, which is, all these things, and the diversity in the broadest sense. And then the other question that I have is kind of, again, you just completed this, so all the results might not really be clear just yet, but is the why question. Because as you both laid out, these students are not getting credit for this.
Yeah, right.
And so the question is, why did they decide to participate? And then could any of those learnings be translated into creating a similar atmosphere in a corporate environment?
Yeah. Let me just address the why question straight up, because I think it's pretty straightforward, right? Mark, I remember a statistic I'd shared with you last time. Waterloo, a world-class engineering university in Canada, had seen their co-op placement rates fall historically from 96% to about 30%. Okay. And people would line up out the door, and the Canadian government actually had to offer incentives to companies to hire Waterloo graduates. Okay. Or, Waterloo co-op students. Students very much are looking for jobs in the innovation economy. And they understand exactly as Ikhlaq described that the design sprint, the hackathon, the project is the new interview. So, many of them are looking for opportunities, and they're looking to, build their skills and put their skills into practice. And, we had some examples of students that, we had every day, we had up to 3 hours of office hours, like 90 minutes in the morning and, an hour that extended into 90 minutes each night. And we had some students that used every single hour. They literally were up in the middle of the night from India doing office hours. They were like sponges. They were soaking up everything that they could, right? So I call it growth mindset. And we saw students with an extraordinary growth mindset that, wanted to learn everything they possibly could, keep asking us, when are you going to run another one? When are you going to run another one? So that's the answer to the second question. Ikhlaq, you want to answer the first question about the diversity?
Let me continue on the why a little bit, and then I'll come over to the diversity and team forming part of the question. So I think Mike articulated very well that students have this interest to get this kind of real life education. They want to understand these things. They know that their future is in these types of companies. I've said this before, you can go to a 4-year program and study any given topic, supply chain, whatever, and not know what the supply chain group in Apple or Amazon or wherever, what do they actually talk about? So, the ability to put students in the real life learning, they're very drawn to it. That's certainly part of the why. But I think there's more to the why, because there's the benefit to unlock their potential, and as I said, learn in real life projects and of course meet the industry. But there's a why also from the company point of view, and the fact is that companies seem to like to have visibility with this type of talent pool. So, to be on these projects or to speak to the whole group or to be known to them is very important. To be able to do very specialized targeted recruiting is very important. If you're looking for let's say some narrow set of IT types of skills or some cross combination of process and chemistry, if you're building batteries or you're doing a big data science project and you need these students, or it might be even like a more rare thing where there's very few, the ability to set up projects that students can apply to, that it's not necessarily just to solve the problem, but only certain types of students can even attempt to solve those types of problems. And so you're pulling out of the woodworks the types of people that would have these capabilities. And of course, through our networks, we're pulling people who would have those capabilities.
Yeah.
And
Ikhlaq, can I interrupt you there? Just think about, here we have Turner, who's the CEO founder of Beagle, right? He's an MIT graduate. He lives in the Boston, Cambridge community. He has access to, the MIT alumni network. And he's found a young man in the Czech Republic to bring onto his team. I mean, that says a lot to me right there, right? To Ikhlaq's point.
Yeah. So I guess, ultimately there is the solving the problem, but as I said, your ability to do very specialized recruiting, is a reason why companies, want to engage, and why they're talking to us now about the types of things that we can do. And sometimes, and I'm going to go into your team formation topic in a second here, but the bridge connector between those is, it doesn't always have to be a hugely diverse team. Sometimes when companies or governments or universities talk to us, it's more regional. So, you can have a country or a region, and they say, well, what we'd like to do is match the best students with the best opportunities, even in the local region. Even if you bring some students from around the world so that they get a broader education and they understand the innovation models and so forth, the fact is they want to hire locally. And so, in that area, you can really kind of pump up the connections between the best students, the matching, all the talent acquisition, and the training. Okay, so now your original question, which I think we're kind of getting to it by explaining all the context around it. But you're basically saying, okay, fine. So you got all these students from different places, and you throw them on a team together. How does that really work? And there's a couple aspects to that. One is, first of all, diversity is actually value when you get to talking about projects. When you got everybody who knows how to do exactly the same thing and they all have the same perspective, you really don't get much in terms of solutions. But the other side to this is that that a little bit of this is done through the development and the setting up of the ideas of how this program works. In other words, when we first get them together, we don't, we let them understand that that there is the value in each other, but that this is also what will naturally happen is some people are really going to contribute, some people are going to be very proactive, and some people are going to be less, and some people are going to be kind of less engaged. And you're going to have some people kind of self-select themselves out of these teams because they're just not able to put in the energy, or they're not that motivated, or they're not that interested. And so what happens is you put people together, but they have the right expectation of how this thing is going to happen. And if expectation is just like in real life, how many times have you been put together with other people, and then there's a couple people that, really did all the work, and 3 other people that were on that project didn't do, much. Suppose, you get in that situation. To understand that might happen in your case actually helps. And to understand that if you are one of those 2 or 3 that is going to be carrying most of the work and doing, and is going to be the most effective, you're going to get rewarded for that, because people are going to know that, you're the one that did more of this. This is how people get promoted in companies. And this is how people, in this case, are going to be profiled higher and are going to be more visible to the companies that want to hire them, because they are the types that step up and do that. So all of that is kind of built into our team formation process. I could go on and talk about what we do on the AI side, but I'm going to say just at the human level, letting people understand the expectations of how the team should work really solves that problem.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that the sprint methodology, right, is about one of the fundamental principles of the sprint methodology is working alone together. And what that really means is, you go in with a fairly clear idea of a problem that needs to be solved, because this is not where the team comes together and brainstorms like, what do we want to work on? This is the company has a project that needs to be solved. And we've assembled the right set of technical and business skills to solve it. And so, you know, we've asked the students to pick their swim lanes, right? What are you good at? We asked them to share their superpowers and their kryptonite with each other. Okay. So we have a pretty clear understanding of who can contribute what. And then rather than just sitting around talking, it's like, okay, this is how we're going to get this outcome in 4 days. This is what needs to be done. I'm going to go off and work on my piece. You're going to work on your piece. We're going to come together at the end of each day. Our mentors is going to connect us. So the methodology, I think, in addition to just the expectations, is an important part of that. And what you find, Mark, is that, like, in a couple of instances, there were sophomores that stepped up to become the leaders of their teams, right? And it's just another example. You can't really predict. That's why the project is the interview, because you really don't know who the leaders are until you give them the opportunity to demonstrate leadership.
Right, of course.
And that was what was so amazing to see, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys, let me drop one more idea into this conversation, which is that, you know, at a high level, you know, we've been saying we're kind of building towards the, you know, kind of the future of higher education types of programs. Like, how do you educate people in a very real settings, experientially? You know, how do you make it really valuable for them, right? So we're learning and we're doing these things. But while we're developing this type of training, I'll call it training, very targeted training, as we've been talking to companies, they've been bringing to us like other ideas about what you can do with this type of training. And some of them are also asking us about, can you even do this with the employees we even have? Because if you want to teach a group of people how to have those innovation behaviors, how to be appropriately aggressive in taking the next step, how to get a lot done in, you know, these short times, or just overall, like I said, broad entrepreneurial or innovative type of behaviors, this can also be internal training, like an internal training exercise. So I think there's a lot of things that we're learning about this initial initiative and where it can eventually, you know, like the different forms that it may take. You know, I just say that, you know, like I see this in, you know, it could be longer programs or it could be more within a company. But I think that from what we've seen, there's more than one incarnation of it that are all seem to be useful to people.
Yeah, so true. Absolutely. And that's a nice segue, Ikhlaq, to sort of where you go from here with this. I mean, I could certainly see companies wanting to create this type of, maybe call it and Mike used the term, this urgency or this inclination towards action. And I got to tell you, you know, from my background in politics, working with small teams on the big issues in a very compressed time frame, it's everyone focused on the problem rather than a lot of the internal kind of maybe personal dynamics that can sometimes slow or torpedo teams completely. So the sprint idea, even on discrete projects within companies, I could see how that could be cross-functional teams put together, could be extremely useful. For folks who are listening, who are wondering like, wow, this is amazing. I want to learn more. I want to know what's next. When are they running another one of these? Or whatever the next step is, at least preliminarily. I would love for you to address that.
Okay, all right. So I would say if you are interested in these types of things, probably reach out to Mike and or me, because we're basically brainstorming with people all the time now about what kind of events and the shape of the next one. It might be that we do them kind of more customized, or it might be that we do it aggregated, say something in May where we have multiple companies and multiple students from different parts of the world together. But all these are basically possible. You know, all versions of this are possible. I think the next one will probably be longer than 4 days. I think we got a lot of feedback that that some training for the students that would unlock more of their potential before they get right to the specific project where the company is specifically involved might be useful. So, I think we'll look at that. And I think, like I said, there's definitely the concept here of the real life experiential situations in the next one. And there's definitely the concept of profiling for the proactive team behaviors and the skills. I think will stay, that will be there. But I think what we're learning about the why and where it could go. So I think targeted recruiting, it can be for, specialized projects. I see ecosystem building or, matching students and companies within regions. I see variations where we're doing internal employees of companies. And I see hybrid versions of those where you've got students and internal employees working together, because some of these students really have a Gen Z perspective, particularly for consumer companies, getting people on the teams who are the age group and demographic of their customers can really make like a world of difference in terms of what gets proposed on the table, and maybe put a little truth into those discussions that are happening inside the company as well. So I think all these things are basically next step on the roadmap.
Yeah, and let me just add one more. So one of the things we didn't recap, but you may remember that our financial sponsor is the education activist and philanthropist Esther Wojcicki, whose two daughters, most famous daughters, are CEOs of YouTube and 23andMe. And we included in our student cohort students from Jamaica, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. Right? So we had, for example, a lot of students from the Technical Institute of Jamaica. And we were able to bring them into working with teams from more developed countries and maybe more established universities, right? And it clearly opened up their eyes to a world they'd not seen before. But one of the things we see we have an opportunity to do is to reach out to underrepresented groups, right? Where you look at Google just settled a $4 million bias case last week, right? And just Silicon Valley in general and the tech industry has done a very poor job of hiring underrepresented groups. And so what we're also looking to do is bring more and more people from underrepresented communities into the program as a way of giving them economic empowerment and exposing them to professional opportunities they may not have. And on the other side, of course, there's no question there's a movement toward diversity in large companies. And many of them appear to be well-intentioned and striving to improve diversity in their ranks. So we want to be also a source of talent for the best technical undergrad and grad students, whatever race, creed they represent, wherever in the world they may be.
Wonderful. And that is just fantastic. And, those will be the last words. I just love where this is going. This update is really inspiring. And again, it's all about action and making a lot of these principles and things that people say real, and demonstrating how they can be such leaps and bounds beyond what we're doing right now. So we'll have information, as Ikhlaq had referred to, how do you learn more about this kind of initiative as it continues to evolve and expand. I have information about that in the show notes. And I just want to thank you, Iklaq and Mike, for pushing this forward and bringing this, taking advantage, capitalizing on such a terrible situation with the pandemic, and turning that and finding this real nugget, like you were suggesting, Mike, really is gold, and Iklaq, this gold that can be so beneficial all across our economy and globally as well. So thank you both for your leadership.
Well, listen, it's been a labor of love to do this. I think it's also been just an absolute privilege to collaborate with Ikhlaq on this. I think we have a common worldview, and I think it's been deeply satisfying for us. So, but we appreciate the kind words. And again, Mark, always a pleasure to have a chance to connect. Thank you again for giving us the opportunity, the platform to kind of, share our story. And, again, the quickest way to find us is just www.globalventurecatalyst.org, but we'll have everything else in the show notes for people.
Wonderful. Just wonderful.
Okay.
And listeners, I want to thank you for being along on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.